Колеги, всім доброго дня. Ми починаємо наш круглий стіл. На жаль, з певним запізненням, але то пов'язано з технічними питаннями.
I have to say that we have to start. We are a bit late, but it were technical reasons. So our panel has the title "Life Under the Russian Occupation: Challenges and Consequences." So our internet is unstable of us who are in Ukraine, and if we disappear, we will try to rejoin you. We have also colleagues in Berlin. There are 3 colleagues. They are in Berlin, present there, and they can be our insurance if we lose the connection. So why are we here? Why did we gather this round table? We want to gather information of how do people live under Russian occupation, and which consequences and challenges do we face after it's been deoccupied. You have your programs and speaker list, and so we can start with the humanitarian situation in these territories. Our organization, Alternatyva, Regional Human Rights Center Alternative in Luhansk, we are publishing our monthly bulletin about the life under occupation, thanks to USAID. And our colleagues, Natalya Gordienko, can give you some details about the life under occupation, what tendencies we are seeing there, what is happening there. And Natalya is now in Berlin, so I invite you, and floor is yours. Up to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Вітаю. Дякую, Валерію. Вітаю, колеги.
Thank you, Valerii. Dear colleagues, in armed conflicts, there are some humanitarian principles which are there to save the lives and to diminish the impact on civilians. But the Russian aggression is unprecedented violation of humanitarian rights of Ukrainian citizens by Russian soldiers. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating in Ukraine, and in some places it's a catastrophe. And we can divide these regions due to the impact they had because of this war. We start with the regions that have been occupied right at the start. There were no hostilities, but they were occupied at the very start. I mean, the parts of Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Oblast. And despite the fact that there were no hostilities, there was a severe impact on civilians. They had their connection was blocked, the cell phones, internet. It was an informational vacuum where Russian propaganda was very, very active. And in those territories, the prices have soared for fuels, for all sorts of goods that are necessary for daily life. And the governing authorities were forced to cooperate. Lots of companies have closed down because they couldn't operate. People are becoming unemployed. They depend on social services, but they are forced to give up their passports, their documents, and sometimes even to forcibly take the citizenship of Russian Federation. For men, it's particularly severe because they can be forced to go to the army. So they are also prohibiting the national currency, hryvnia, Ukrainian hryvnia. They are devaluing this national currency and forcing the people to change their currency to ruble, and it is important for people who are dependent on social services such as rent. And then there are some regions which have suffered under the active hostilities. Mariupol, parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, big part of the housings were destroyed, are destroyed, and lots of people are forced to live in cellars and in tents. They are cooking outside with fire because they cannot use their apartments, they cannot stay warm. In Mariupol, there were some houses built by the occupational authorities, but only people who are cooperating can live there. In Luhansk, they are trying to forcibly take the property away from people who left, and to solve this problem, because the winter is coming, and the regions who have been affected the most are where the hostilities are still taking place. So Russian Federation Russian army destroys the critical infrastructure, and there is no water supply and no canalization, and people are fleeing, but those who cannot flee, they must carry their water, they must stay in line to get some food, and there are no logistic chains present, and this leads to lack of goods that are needed to live, to survive. Also medical supply. Also there is no medical aid because the doctors are not there, and dead bodies are lying on the street, and locals tell us that the police is prohibiting them in gathering those bodies, and up to 90% of civilians are impacted through this. And the Kyiv School of Economics is telling us the figures, and 127 billions of dollars. The damage is approximately 127 billion of dollars. The northern Ukraine, where Russian army was forced to leave, it is also always this goes hand in hand with looting, with stealing goods and removing all sorts of valuable goods. They take it away with them. There are damages to water supplies, critical infrastructure, and electricity. Also, they are leaving landmines and mines everywhere, and it is an impact that will last for years to come. In Oblast Kherson, this week, 2 cars have exploded because of mines, and in one car there was a family with a small child. And in September, only in September, the occupants have deported more than 7,000 people from Ukraine to Russia, and only 51 children have been returned from Russia to Ukraine, 7,000 children. These are the data from the High Commissioner on Human Rights. Thank you so much, Natalya. This humanitarian situation is there are millions and hundreds of thousands of people and millions of people. If we take into consideration the territories that have been occupied before, it's the life and it's just survival of these people in these dire conditions, and it is also a violation of human rights in these territories that are occupied by Russia. And this question, we have Olga Altunina, who can tell us more. She is I will be brief. Olga Altunina is representative of the Commission of the Rights of Citizens, and we have a monitoring mission, and we are trying to defend the rights of people who are suffering the armed aggression against Ukraine. We have 5 categories. As are internal displaced persons, persons who have fled the country abroad, persons who are in temporarily occupied territories, and those who are under hostilities where the war is taking place. So also there is the forced deportation to Russia or forced deportation to the occupied territories from Ukraine. So we have the data concerning, we have the data from our citizens, from Ukrainian citizens, from all those who are seeking help to restore their rights. And it can be said that the most cases, if we are speaking about the temporarily occupied territories, it concerns how to leave these territories, how to get the papers back, and deportation of children, forced deportation of children, and other questions. If you allow, I can show you a brief presentation.
Видно? Да?
I hope you can all see the slides. Now we have two slides per page, but if it's possible, please look at the page 2. There are Ukrainian cities and villages that are under occupations. We have this law about temporarily occupied territories and Ministry of Reintegration. So this is the list and the definition that we get from the ministry, and it's increasing despite the fact that our troops are liberating our territory step by step. If we speak about the violation of international law that we want to speak about today, this list is, of course, not a full list. We are speaking just about the norms of international law that are violated by Russian troops. It's torture and degrading treatment, filtration, deliberate killings, deportation of civilians, and the most painful topic, children, sexual violence, forcible, men are forced to go to Russian army, then looting and stealing goods, blocking humanitarian aid and corridors, and so on. I cannot name all the figures because it's too much, but all of the figures we can justify and we can account for. Since February 24, there were 60,000 crimes that can be qualified as war crimes, and 368 torture cases, degrading treatment, over 1,000 killings and death sentences. So then looting and yes, about 8,000 people died. 30 of them are children, and over 10,000 wounded, and over 800 children. If we are speaking about humanitarian aid, we had only 25 corridors, and only 13 of them were realized and could function because they have been shelled, or humanitarian aid and these convoys were shelled. We have also criminal cases that are brought to justice, deportations over 48,000, and including 11,000 children. So now 7,000 children are in the temporary occupied territories, and they cannot go to school. Over 14,000 cases of missing citizens, missing people. I think you all know that there are filtration camps, over 27 in these temporarily occupied territories, and 7 camps in the Russian Federation. In the territories of Oblast, Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Kherson that have been deoccupied, we have 26 places of detention, unlawful detention. Deportation of children, the facts are so numerous. Our Office of the Ombudsman is dealing with it every day, and the last case we had was in Balaklia. In Gebit Kharkiv, in Kharkiv Oblast, there were 125 children brought allegedly to a summer camp to Gelendzhik on the Black Sea to Russia, and they are disappeared. They have disappeared, and we are helping the parents to find them, to restore the documents, to retrieve them back to Ukraine, and to give them medical aid. So maybe you know the case. Skadovsk is Ukraine. One family was telling this, was stating it in the occupation, and they have been abducted. This woman and her husband, who had started this action, Skadovsk is Ukraine, and 1 week later, their relatives had become photographs of the dead bodies, and there was a brief letter that they have died or they have been killed. So if we're speaking about torture and degrading treatment of people, it's all public information. We can give you the facts, what we see. No, only in 1 week in Izum in September, what we have seen, it's a forest of death, how we call it. There are corpses of army, of soldiers, of people, of elderly persons. So it's all being discovered now. In the temporarily occupied territories, there are these filtration camps going on. This filtration is still going on. The civilians are forced to do hard labor, to build the fortifications for the Russian army. And we have more and more cases every day. Our ombudsman, we have this information from the media, from other sources, and we are documenting it. We know that it's taking place. So if we're speaking about sexual violence, we have evidence. There are 20 cases in court now, sexual violence during this conflict, blocking humanitarian convoys. The Russian Federation is blocking the access of humanitarian aid to the temporarily occupied territories. The convoys have been shelled. Humanitarian goods have been shelled in Oblast Zaporizhzhia, Chernihiv, Kyiv, Melitopol, numerous facts that have been covered by media, and we know that it's happening, and we hope that this evidence that we have now, our civil society has now said that it could be brought to justice, and the perpetrators, Russian perpetrators, can be made accountable. If we are speaking about the Commissioner for the Rights of Citizens, we can only document the facts, but we are also active in we help people, we explain how can they get new documents, passport, how can they be evacuated, which route can they take, and we are helping people to escape, and we work with parents whose children have been deported or abducted. It's a very important work.
Thank you, Olga. We will have a possibility later to ask this question. We are short on time and we have a lot of speakers. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think that a colleague can get these materials also. And we move to the next topic. I want to note that the problem is not only on the territories that are occupied after 24th of February. The violence of human rights are still on the territories that were occupied since 2014. And it's also the forced mobilization. We prepare the report on this topic, but our colleagues are further in this direction and they can make some assumptions and some summary about this topic. So I ask Alyona Lunyova, Advocacy Manager at the Center for Human Rights, ZMINA. Alyona, the floor is yours. Thank you. I think it will be even shorter. Hello, dear colleagues, and I will talk, yes, about the war crimes as a forced mobilization and to the Russian army or similar structures. And this question is not new. It's not a question that we hear from the 24th of February. There's because even before on the Crimea, we had a similar practice, and it's also a war crime. We had some cases already in the court, but until the 18th of February 2022, we have new situation. It is forced mobilization, really open forced mobilization in Luhansk and Donetsk, in the occupied regions that were occupied until 24th of February. Because from the 18th of February, on 19th February, people were just really physical taken on the street, and or maybe they will be also like scared and put under enormous pressure, and they threat to do something to their families, and that's how they take them forcibly into the army. We have enough information from the open source to witness and information about the examples how people would be forcibly forced to do the army, the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. But it's the tactic which also takes place against the Ukraine all the time, and we documenting this facts of forced mobilization on regular basis, also in Zaporizhia Oblast, in Kherson Oblast. These territories that were occupied after 24th of February. And also there are these cases on the territory that are not officially occupied, but de facto Russian Federation controls these territories. It's difficult to say the figure, how many people were forcibly mobilized. We have approximately 50,000 cases, and we can just say what the Ukrainian civilians gives us the information, and also the speed of mobilization that takes place after the statement of the occupied territories until September 2022. It's also a territory of Crimea. We know about cases of forced mobilization of the Crimea Tatarians, and we know that this forced mobilization is one kind to take revenge on the people who are not loyal, because if you go to the Russian army, it's like to take the freedom from you if you are not loyal to Russian Federation. The people who are still on the occupied territory, we can say that to that people that they have to leave this territory or maybe just to hide, because if people that don't do it, we have a lot of cases where people also like injured people or maybe disabled people who actually can't go to army. And we have a cases that these people are forcibly mobilized, and then they say that they can't go to Ukrainian army because they are, for instance, disabled, but they were forcibly mobilized to Russian army. Unfortunately, we can't do anything. We can only recommend to people to hide or to leave the territory. But the Russian Federation, what we can do, we work together with Ukrainian institutions, with the Ukrainian state, and because we have many people that are also in Russian detention, and Ukraine can't conduct the criminal trial if they left Ukraine and went to Russian armies. But this is a question, we work on this question, and we talk about it also in the Office of Prosecutor in general, that if you have people who leave the Ukraine and go to Russian army, we have to note whether it was free or whether it was forced. There are also some changes. Also, like your legal support can give you a good advice how to act in this situation. If we have these facts that one person were detained and were forced to the Russian army, we have to take we have to take all this information and also look at it in front during the prosecution, during also the case, the law case. So our work consists of the working with people who were forced mobilized, but also to inform the people who live in the occupied territories, also to make sure that they don't get forcibly to the Russian army in order to save their lives. Thank you very much. Alyona, thank you. I want to add that there is a mobilization, but we also know what does it mean. It's not only all things that can happen to you. It's also you can also die on the battlefield. And we know that the Russian Federation has a different meaning about his soldiers, and especially about the soldiers that they take from the occupied territory. They have no enough not weapons and everything, that have no enough meat to defend themselves, and they will be sent in a battlefield in the first row. So, and it's absurd in this war. It's my emotional comment that it's absurd, because Russia in its propaganda says that it wants to defend Russian people and Russian society on the territories of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, but they destroy them. They just send them into death when they forcibly mobilize them. And so it's how the propaganda works, and it's also the topic of the propaganda now. And I ask Andrii Dikhtyarenko, its editor-in-chief and online media Realnaya gazeta, and also head of NGO Frontyr. Please tell us about the propaganda. Hello, dear colleagues. I am sorry about the internet connections, as also a lot of people in Kiev. I don't have electricity at home. I am sitting here in cafe, so if you will have problems with voice, please excuse me. Okay, what is the situation? We left 2014 Luhansk, but we keep tracking the situation there. We have a journalistic investigation there, and also we counteract their propaganda on the occupied territories. I want to say that propaganda is not chaotic. It's a system that was built, and we learn how the system functions and how it works. We began this work with 2015. In 2015, Realnaya gazeta got some documents and material, the narratives and sheets with topics for the speaker, what they have to say, and we published this data. And live, we can say how media works, and keeping the track of these sheets. Now, when the occupied territory alters, so we can say that the old occupied territories, Donetsk and Luhansk, they are very active in the informational war. In their information space, there are no problems of the locals. And we have talked about it already. For instance, this topic like a forced mobilization or other topics, these topics are prohibited. So the topics that we see are completely different. For instance, you had a leader ahead of Luhansk military point can say that there are not forced mobilization. So, and people start to look for the information, for the honest information on social media. There are a lot of groups on Telegram, and you have real-time information about also people who are forced for mobilization. Okay, and the other topic is also abductions of soldiers. And what is the aim? The aim is also not to mention the figure of the casualties of the Russian Federation, and also about the figures of the army on the occupied territories on Donetsk and Luhansk. We also investigated the cases where Ukrainian refugees would set on fire one house in Germany. We investigated this case, and we saw that there was a picture of the house that was set on fire 1 year ago. So they would take like old information and create a new case. So few days ago, we had also the silence about the Kherson, but when they became the instruction how to report on Kherson, only then their speakers began to give the information and to say, yeah, it was necessary in order to save lives of Russian soldiers. So we have heard the same phrases from the speaker, from the so-called experts. Also, when we had this massive airstrikes of Ukrainian cities, yesterday we had the strikes, so we hear the narratives that it's not only terrorism and that civilian objects were attacked, that it's revenge. On 10th of October, it was revenge for Sevastopol, and before it was about the Crimean Bridge. So these terroristic attacks would be revenge that someone attacks Russian military objects. And we can't explain the attacks from yesterday. We haven't heard any. They were just happy and just said it just right though, because you are on the side of Kiev regime. So that's what they say. The media organization that tries to send information to the occupied territories, because now they are completely in the occupied information regime. They don't talk about the topics that is important for the people. They only say that the economic situation is difficult because the occupier destroyed all the mines and different companies on the occupied territory. So we try to work with social media, and our homepage is blocked on these territories, but there are more YouTube channels and they are working, they are still working. And there are also Telegram channels that people use them. We have also so-called explainers that explain for people. Alyona mentioned that not all people who are on these occupied territories are not forced to go into the war from against Ukraine. So we explain what to do in case the missile are attacking again, and we explain a lot, and this work is very important, and we hope we can proceed doing this work. And also, it's important for the people to show themselves. So we recorded one video, we changed the voice and we changed the face, but it's people, or it's one person who were 6 months in his flat, and he didn't go on the street because he was afraid that he would be sent into the war, force mobilized. So this story was also very moving. We communicate a lot with people who are there, and they understand that situation can alter, so that in the next months the old occupied territories can be freed. And they have a lot of questions regarding future. So it's important to support the media that try to communicate to people on the occupied territories. That's all from me. If you have questions, I will try and answer them. Thank you, Andrii. I want to add that on the occupied territories, you have a lot of propaganda also with youth. In the school, you have like this youth circles. You have also books from the Russian Federation. They alter the history. So they work with the youth in order to build different reality that is useful for the Russian Federation. I want to add, regarding this question, we conducted a study about the Kazakh class also in the new occupied territories. We have the party members of the United Russia, and they wanted to work in the school. So it's the altering of the school program into the military aspect, and they are trying to prepare the scholars to go after the school on the front, and it's very bad.
Thank you, Andrii. There are numerous topics we can talk and talk because it's never done, but we have to move forward, and we have the second part of our round table. We have a paper that we wanted to discuss. It is called Flee Cannot Stay. And this is an NGO working with the transitional justice who is helping us. And this paper is called Flee Cannot Stay. So, we are dealing with the factors. How did people take this decision, if they flee or if they stay? What was the influence for them? What was their thinking? How did they take this decision on the territories that have been occupied after the 24th of February? And we have talked to people who fled and to people who stayed. And what was the influence? We had 16 in-depth interviews with people, and the results are what we present in this paper. And the title is ambiguous in Ukrainian because it depends on where you put the comma, if you stay or if you flee. And Iryna can give us some information. She represents the Center for Veterans and their families, Poruch, in Ukraine. I would like to tell you about one case, a woman from Mariupol who's 50-something, and she lived in the very center of Mariupol on the 11th floor of one of the residential building, and not far from this maternity hospital that has been bombed. You have seen this, and she remained in the city after the 24th of February because she has an elderly mother who was disabled, and she made the decision to remain because of her mother. And she was looking from this 12th or 11th store above the city, and she had an overview because she had windows going to every side. And she was looking at this continuous destruction of her home city that was happening just before her eyes. And the mother, her disabled mother, has refused to be evacuated. And as the bombs came down on this maternity hospital, she took this decision because she had children and grandchildren, this woman, and she understood that she wants to leave because she wants to see her children, and she understood that she was so high and on the 12th floor, and it was shaking constantly, the house. She just was scared because it was like a tree in the wind. From this constant shelling, the house had been shaking, and she decided to leave. And her mother, so the grandmother, she refused, and she left her alone in this building on the 12th floor with dysfunctional elevators. Of course, it was second half of March already, and the city was with cut electricity, without water, without nothing was there anymore, the vital infrastructure. She had some food, she had some medicine for her mother because mother has diabetes, and she had some supply, and then she left. And she couldn't reach her mother. She had no contact to her mother. She couldn't even ask anyone to go and see if the mother is still alive. She left her some food supply. And yes, but why I'm telling you about this? Because now we have these discussions in Ukrainian society. Was it better to stay or to leave? Who left? So they are being confronted with, why didn't you remain, stay and defend your city? And those who stayed are being asked, are you out of your mind? Why have you stayed here? It's just, you are at risk of being killed or tortured. So any decision is being questioned. And this woman, she is now close to breakdown because she's crying. She left her mother and she took this decision, but she just wanted to leave and to live. So it's a decision that cannot be done by anyone else. And it's so important to talk about this in our society. The post-war discourse, it would be very important. The people are interviewed, the subjects, they the majority who left, they left the first 1 or 2 days. It was this window where you could leave. There were trains still operating, and people who didn't flee in the first 2 or 3 days, they understood, they felt already that it can only get worse. And it was some kind of decision if they didn't leave immediately, because they knew that the first 2 days they have seen that the evacuation was in progress. It was not regulated by anyone, but it was possible to leave, and there were some trains and transports out of the city. And those who did stay, then hostilities were becoming stronger and intensifying, and there was destruction going on, there were killings going on and shelling, and it was my home city is Mariupol, by the way. I wanted to tell you, there's nothing left. No, my family has left, and everything we had is destroyed. End of February, there was no electricity. And not only in Mariupol, in other cities where the war was taking place, this hostility was going on, the civil infrastructure was destroyed very quickly. So the people who didn't leave immediately, they have been facing the conditions, impossible conditions. And those who left, their motivation was to save their family, children and elderly persons. And those who stayed, interestingly, had the same motivation: to live, to hide, to survive. And people in Luhansk that has been occupied 8 years, for 8 years. So they have been living with it, because they heard the shellings, because constantly something was going on, but still they could live, they arranged somehow, and they were used to it. And so the newly occupied territories, people had to leave under shellings. There have been cars were destroyed, and the most population majority didn't have any cars or personal transportation means, and all the streets were just covered with glass splitters, and the roads were being destroyed in the cars, and there was just fuel leaking out of destroyed vehicles. And then it was very difficult, impossible almost to leave. And there were army checkpoints. The peoples have undergone this filtration. They have had to just get naked, and they were just examined, very bad treatment, and they had to undergo this to leave. But some people were detained in filtration camps before they have been granted the possibility to leave, and it was quite a long time for some people that have been detained in these filtration camps. Novazovsk, that was occupied already in 2014, and so another group of people who left were patriots of Ukraine, because they were just hunted down by the occupants, by the Russians. They were the first candidates to be detained, and also in small cities and small villages, there were people who collaborated, and they gave the information to Russian troops and authorities who is the patriot of Ukraine, who has been serving in some Ukrainian authorities. And this information was transmitted, unfortunately. And in the middle of March, there was still a possibility to leave without filtration, because the hostility was still in progress. It was very active. And so it was still possible to leave. And some patriots of Ukraine could flee without filtration, without being detained. But afterwards, there have been numerous cases where people have been detained in filtration camps, and they are in imprisonment now. So our respondents also told us there were people who left to the territories that have been occupied before. Novazovsk, parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, it was just easier to go there, to get there. And they left. They couldn't leave to the Ukrainian side because there was fighting taking place. And on the other side that has been occupied previously, it was a bit safer to leave. And they left in this direction. Sometimes ideological reasons, but the majority of people just to save their lives. And some of them went even to Russian Federation or so-called republics. And of course, not only to Ukrainian side. Starting with the second half of March and April, there was another complication because the road was very long. The roads for before the 24th of February, we already had these connections, yes, and the way from Mariupol to Zaporizhia, it was just an hour. And now there were 12 hours, 24 hours, because they had to stop, they had to hide, to stop somewhere in the field and to interrupt their movement because it was dangerous. So they couldn't just move as it was before. It was a very, very long time. And as we have conducted the interviews, we learned that the main obstacle was filtration. I have patriots of Ukraine. They are left in Mariupol. They are there even now, and they understand that it's safer to hide in Mariupol and to wait until the city is liberated, because they know if they try to leave, there's a very, very high possibility they are caught, and because they were proactive, very pro-Ukrainian, and they know about them, and it's almost 100% possibility that they would be detained and with all the implications. So yeah, I know that my time is running out. I try. Yes, you only have a few seconds. Well, I wanted to talk about people who left there, who remained there, sorry. Firstly, they thought it will soon come to an end, and they have been waiting, and then it was getting not so intense, the shelling, and if the house still stands, so then people just thought, thanks God, I still live, and if something has been destroyed or maybe you have lost some property, it's not so bad, and lots of people just didn't want to leave, because if the house still stands, you have those memories, you have these photographs, some personal things. It's your life. It's what defines you. So they just stayed there. It's one category. The other category of people who didn't want to abandon their disabled relatives, elderly persons, mothers, fathers, or other relatives that are disabled, and they wanted to care for them, and they understood that it would be difficult, so they stayed to take care of them. And a moral choice is also lots of people have been telling us that they cannot live in some shelters, temporary shelters, or other people's homes, because they don't feel comfortable. They cannot arrange with it. It's not material. It's some psychological motivation, intrinsic motivation. Some people just cannot leave what is theirs and live somewhere else. So it's another category of those who stayed. And some people told us, I'm patriot of my city, and no matter what authority, it's my city. I am first and foremost the citizen of this city, town, and village, so I stay. So this was another category. Sorry that for speaking so long. Thank you, Iryna. I would like to invite Anastasia Yaroshenko, Center for psychological adaptation, psychosocial adaptation. She will continue. I don't want to repeat because lots have been said already, and I don't want to. I'm sorry for my connection because it's bad. The challenges we're facing are common challenges. I would like to categorize, and so our challenges to leave were different in different stages of the invasion. So people who left in the first days, they are left not knowing where they're going, of course. So because in the first days of invasion, there were bombings in the whole territory of Ukraine, and people just left without knowing where. This was, of course, a challenge because they didn't know where they're going and how will they survive if they have the means and the money. Later, you know, the main obstacle was filtration. It's a horror. I don't want to repeat. I just say that people who stayed there, they are still facing this problem that they don't have the means to leave, to flee. Depending on the territory they're in, of course, you can buy passage, so to speak, but sometimes you have to go through Russian Federation, sometimes through Poland or Lithuania, and it's a commercial enterprise, so you have to pay if you have the means. And after 9 months of war, they just don't have the money to use this where it's possible still to live in this way. So my work is psychological help, and this is what defined me in the city of Shastia in Luhansk region. Until September, we had the psychological center of psychosocial adaptation, and now we are working remotely online because it's not possible anymore. And so there are psychological challenges for people who left, who stayed there, for people who knew that they cannot stay under occupation. I knew, for example, about myself. I understood immediately, I cannot stay under occupation. I left on the 24th of February. And lots of people had this motivation because they can't stay under occupation. Lots of people hope that it just won't happen, that it's all bluffing and that the invasion won't take place. And how do people react in crisis? How freeze or flee? Yes, so there were different reactions depending on people, on concrete people, and of course there were people who have chosen to flee and freeze, the two main reactions. So then this stress and challenge has been just postponed. Mm-hmm.
Among these people, there are people who didn't plan to leave. They wanted to stay by any means. Iryna mentioned already, and I want to add the specific, because it's difficult to make this decision. Also, like for people, elderly people, the house and the city. The house is something that they have worked the whole life in order. They saved for many years in order to buy the car or something, and it's very difficult for them to leave this behind. And we have people, like examples, who stayed under occupation. And to sum up, and I don't want also to repeat, but maybe it's better to leave more questions, more time for the questions. Thank you for this possibility to talk to you, and I'm happy that it worked. Anastasia, thank you very much. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time left. We have 2 questions and then another questions. I want to add that the topic now, as Iryna already mentioned, it's dialogue for the future. We have to understand how to act in the future, how we shall talk to people and have something in common between people who left and between people who stayed, but there are also possible conflict between the people who were together under occupation. We have also to talk about collaboration, about our understanding of this topic. Do we think that the doctors who stayed and was working, or maybe the teachers who would teach in the school, or maybe like the state workers who were cleaning the streets, where you can also say that they were collaborating with the occupation? It's complex questions. We need to discuss them. We have begun already to talk about it in our study that we have conducted, and I asked Olena Nizhelska to give us some details about this work. She is head of Siverskyi Donetsk, the Crisis Media Center. Thank you very much, Valerii, and thank to everyone who joined our session today. I was listening to my colleague, and I remembered also what I have experienced, because I could also be, I'm from Severodonetsk, and I could also be that person. And in the morning of 24th of February, we so many people had to decide whether I leave or I stay. We left on 24th, my family and me, and in April we came back and took our elderly father with us, and also another relatives. Now we are in Dnipro, because that's why all questions that we discussed today, so it's not only my professional view, it's also my personal question, because I live everything, every topic that we discuss today. But regarding to study, well, as we asked the question about the collaboration, so we can say that was the question that make them the most radical, and it would divide our respondents who were very empathic when they would tell about their experience when they left, and when they would listen to the stories or talk about the stories of the people who stayed. But if we began to speak about the collaboration with the occupation government, so more people would be more radical. It's about justice, and they want justice. People want justice, and people don't have a realization how they want to have this justice and what criterion does have the collaboration. What you just mentioned, for instance, the people who clean the streets, or doctor who give the medical support or treatment, or teacher in a school, are they collaborants? And we had a tile, the part of respondents who would say, yes, they are collaborants, even if they do their work. There were also people who would say doctor is like a mechanic who would repair the weapons of the enemy. If this doctor treats the enemy, he renews the instrument that will kill Ukrainians tomorrow. So we had also these cases. it's not the first study of Svetogorsk group, and we study this topic of collaboration. And every time it's very divisive, these questions, also the question regarding teachers, it's a trigger that divides everyone. On the one side, we have also voices that say that people who teach mathematics, physics, these science that don't depend on the political situation. But they are also on the other side, they say, teacher is not only people who give you knowledge. Teacher is the person who gives you, who shows you the way into the adult world and also shows his position in the world. And also there were some voices that say that the teachers who would remain on the occupied territories, that they would visit the courses in Rostov, in Russia, for instance, how they have to teach regarding to Russian standards. Then also we have the examples how the lessons would begin. Not only history or literature, but also like physics or mathematics. Where information would be like gifts in this imagined world. And the situation is very problematic. And we don't know how to resolve the situation. Regarding the people of the city infrastructure, so the society is less critical about them. So for instance, like people who try and repair the water supply, and in Severodonetsk, we don't have a water or electricity or something, but people who try to repair the cities, so our questionnaires think that they do their work in order to save lives of the people who stayed there. And it's important to understand then if people talk about collaboration, they give examples of solidarity and of solidarity, and that emphasizes that we don't have the same cases, we don't have the same examples. It's all, everything is complicated and it needs a complex answers. It divides the society, especially if we talk about responsibility. There are people who see that we cannot bring everyone to justice. We need huge resources, time resources and also material resources. But we hear very often the proposals that where we hear about deprivation of the right to vote, for instance, or also to be alleged. And we hope that these cases will be also taken into account, that people who were collaborating, that they don't have the right to vote or to be voted. Very often our questionnaires would talk about the story with the passport, with the citizens and non-citizens, about the social guarantees or other possibilities to live in the country, but they don't have the right anymore to vote or to be on the direct positions or important positions. The people are very negative to idea that their collaborations wouldn't brought to justice. And here the people would mention 2014. They say that the evil had a bad example because the people, if they would decide whether they will leave or stay, they were thinking about 2014 and they decided to stay because back then it was not so dangerous. And also regarding to collaboration, people would think about 2014 and the people who were collaborating back then. Severodonetsk was occupied for 3 months. And in July, in 2014, the city would be deoccupied again. And people who were collaborating were not brought to justice. And it was also the people who would stay on their position after the occupation. They were also in charge of social politics. They had the access to public information, also to the families of the members of ATO. And now the history repeats it, and these people are still there. And the lists that Iryna mentioned, it's the date from the access that they had access to. Luhansk is occupied, nearly 97% are occupied, and the situation is different in different regions. The north was occupied very fast and without destructions, and Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Rubizhne, and the city which are in the near of Popasna, Nizhelska. And if these cities doesn't mean anything for you, but I want you to know that the city of Popasna is destroyed by 95%. Almost nothing remains there. And in this city, no one can also collaborate. But Luhansk, which was occupied instantly, they were collaborating from the first day, and we cannot leave them unpunished. And how will this dialogue take place? It's a complicated question, and we need to answer it legally, but also within the dialogue. When we take on talks again between people who lived there during the occupation and the people who stayed there but were in heart with the Ukraine, and also people who were collaborating. Another question, it's a question, some people would go and collaborate freely, and a lot of people would try and to say that they were forced to make this decision, that it was not free decision. And it's also difficult because we have a question how we can say when people were forced or not. Did people do it in order to survive, or did people do it because they have another ideology from the enemy? All these questions we have to discuss and to answer, and it will be very difficult for Ukraine. But today we have the main question to help to win the deoccupied territories, to deoccupy the territories, and after the victory we have to discuss all other questions. Now we need a solidarity. and victory. Thank you. Thank you, Olena. So we started 15 minutes later, so we have 12 minutes left. And now I ask Iryna, please, your main recommendation about our publication. And as long as Iryna prepares herself, I want to comment. First, all people who are members of our second session, it's people who left the occupied territories, the territories that were occupied after 24th of February. They have the most information. They feel that what is happening on the occupied territories. Some of them doesn't have their houses, or someone has different negative things. Someone is in Kiev, someone is abroad. And so you can talk to them also during the break. And after our session, we can send our publication to you in Ukrainian and also in English. No, it was not publicated before. Maybe you are interested to have a closer look in it. Iryna? So our study and our analysis of the answer, I want to say that it was not sociological study, but it was a deep interviews. We sociologists would work out the questions, and they also worked with us in the analysis, and we are quite right with our recommendations also regarding what we were talking about yesterday and today, and it's about the politics and civil society, that they have to work closer together. So we have to work with the civil society in order to develop this topic. So we would suggest to the government of Ukraine to build consultation on the national level and also on the local nation. In the regional level and the local level, we need a coordination, consultation in the oblast government, and today it's a military civil administration, and I hope after the war it will be again this order as it was before war. And also we need to develop a platform for dialogue in the civil society. And facilitator and professionals should help to remove these conflicts within the society that were mentioned today. Our second recommendation is about communication. We want to conduct a state communication policy to be more honest and more open for the government. And the communication will be honest, transparent, and people have to be informed on time about all danger. And the government need to suggest concrete actions, because in the case of Mariupol, the government would say for a long time that everything is under control and everything is good, but the tragedy has happened. So, second, communication with the society who suffers trauma. We would recommend to the government to not to make a stereotype, the whole stereotype labels. We need a personal communication. We need to think about different factors that would be important if you take one decision. Maybe people would stay on because they are emotional and also physical factors that we don't see on the first sight. We would recommend the government also to communicate transparent and very clear about how the government would help people in an occupation, what is the plan to remove all the negativity that were brought by the war. And also about the help for the internal displaced people. The recommendation is that we need here also transparency and openness, and we need a new law about and forbid the collaboration. In this law, we need very clear definition regarding collaboration. Who is collaborating? And we need all the description of the situation within people can be seen as a collaborative behavior. And we need also different step of responsibility for every people, for every person. Thank you.
I think that there are such problems in Kyiv now with electricity because we are speakers are just disappearing. I know. No, he's here. Okay. Well, dear colleagues, we have electricity cuts, but we have been preparing, so we have to go to the end under these conditions, but we are almost reaching the end of our roundtable. And if you have some questions to our participants, well, you have some minutes yet for your questions. Andrii Kulikov, Громадське Radio. I've been talking to Olena in April live on the radio, and it's just so important if you have the possibility to speak. What is your knowledge of this scale of collaboration developed by Crimean Tatar Resource Center? They have been assessing and dealing with this problem of collaboration. Thank you so much, Andrii. Yes, we have just briefly took a look into this concept, and we have this problem. There's different groups and activists, they are working on the same topics, but then they have no common grounds and where they are exchanging their thoughts and practices. So I cannot really tell anything about it. I have heard about the scale of assessment of grades of collaboration. It would be so important that we create a platform for this and to work on these topics. And congratulations, by the way, International Radio Day. Yes, the communication between different actors of civil society. For example, we are the Siverskyi group. We are almost 4 years active now in this field, the topic of transitional justice, and this law that didn't pass the parliament in December, I think, about the transitional justice in the occupied territories. So all the people who have been involved and giving their recommendations, it's just such a setback. And now then in January 2022, so shortly before the aggression, I've been to Kyiv, where the representatives of the veterans of the ATO, of this terrorist war in the East, were present, and they have heard about the collaboration and transitional justice for the first time. They were just not, they didn't know this concept about collaboration, and they didn't even know that the law is not applicable for the crimes that have been committed before the law is coming into action. So they just unfamiliar with different principles of international law, of Ukrainian law, and the principles of humanitarian laws, and much of which is applicable to Ukraine. So our civil society, our NGOs, for lots of them, it's just a new topic that they have no idea about, and few people have insights in these topics, but it's so important. And unfortunately, we don't know, I just don't know what this scale is that the Crimean platform has been working on about the collaboration. Thank you so much, Andrii. Our moderator, I think he is off now because I have a question. If you know something about, when you're talking to people who are still under occupation, if they are resisting, if there is still resistance taking place, some actions, and is there some help for the people, I represent the organization Pax for Peace, Netherlands, so it's a topic very important for me. If there's some help and support for the people who are still there. Well, we don't have any news, or very little, from the occupied territories that are still under occupation, but we are sure that there are people who are resisting, still resisting, and not always non-violent, sometimes also violent, but it's resistance in different kinds. And the people are just staying there, and they are trying to do their best. Under these circumstances, we don't have any public. We have no means to support them now, publicly or non-publicly. So then it's a choice of this these people, and I hope that they will stay safe. And sometimes it's better to refrain from some help or encouragement and just to wait and to hope that they will be safe now. There is an organization supporting informational resistance. It's Yellow Ribbon. This organization is called Yellow Ribbon. They are pretty active information. They are bringing out the patriotic leaflets and just these yellow ribbons or yellow-blue ribbons where they leave these signs and leaflets and ribbons and posters. But the population which is under occupation now, they should know that they are not alone, that they have support and even helping each other. I think there is the spirit. I think that it's a good example of the informational resistance, the yellow ribbon. Yes, regarding Mariupol, almost all, I am 8 years now in a volunteer movement, and we have been controlling our government and organizing different actions and protests and campaigns. So lots of us have left, but some of us are imprisoned in captivity. Some people are missing, some activists, or we don't know whether they are dead or just somewhere detained. And I don't have any contact to people there who have left in Mariupol. In social media, we see some signs of resistance where they take pictures with the Ukrainian flag, but from behind. And for some sites of Mariupol, where you can recognize the city that the photo has been taken in Mariupol, we don't know who they are because they are in disguise just from the back. And when we were occupied, it was a shock because we left and they stayed. They are our comrades, our friends, and they left. They have stayed there, and they are still resisting. And some of them are undercover and they don't disclose their identities. They even hide from their family. So this is the price they pay for staying there and resisting. And it's very, very sad. Valerii is off now. He is not anymore online with us. So I suggest that we come to a conclusion and to an end of our roundtable. I'm happy that I had the chance to present our study, and our paper is not so methodological and really scientific, but thank you so much for hearing us.